I've talked about Sony's awful censorship policies for such a long time now. It is a topic that I consistently cover, and I feel like not enough people are aware of the situations or talk about the situations. They let first-party developers get away with doing anything they want, yet third-party devs and Japanese developers especially are just cows for the freaking slaughter. Sony doesn't apply any censorship policies they have equally and fairly, and it's definitely caused a rift in the gaming industry. We've got people on one side who are aware that these situations are happening and are saying they won't accept companies doing terrible things, and on the other side, we've got people who don't want to admit that censorship happens and all they do is defend companies no matter how terrible they are. And now there is more news about Sony and their censorship policies. Sony policy banning dismemberment revealed by CyberConnect 2 CEO in discussion about Demon Slayer. So according to Hiroshi Matsumaya, Sony's heavily censorious policies extend past sexually suggestive content, as the president and CEO of noted video game developer CyberConnect 2 recently revealed that Sony Interactive Entertainment has enforced a similar policy regarding dismemberment and certain depictions of violence. Now keep in mind, this is only coming from one or two sources. This isn't like confirmed at all. But when we have CEOs of big companies, notable companies coming out saying that this is an issue, whether it was now or in the past, it does definitely raise a lot of red flags, and it is something that we need to take note of and pay attention to. So it says, during a recent online employee seminar held on February 19th, Matsumaya was asked for his insight into developing a game with a lot of blood in the Zero system, specifically in reference to how the company would handle Demon Slayer's gore in the upcoming game, given how violent the original series is compared to the other CyberConnect 2 licensed franchises such as Naruto and Dragon Ball. While Matsumaya could not speak to a specific title, instead of referring to fans of Shonen Jump and the game's official website for more information, he went on to explain that though blood and gore, or arms and legs being cut off and kind of that stuff, as you may know, is judged by Zero in Japan, ESRB in the United States, and maybe PEGI in Europe, Sony Interactive Entertainment had their own set of separate policies which developers have to follow in order to see their games released on the company's consoles. This isn't news if you guys have followed these situations. Sony is very strict with their policies. Sony has censored sexually suggestive content in games. They have been extremely strict with Japanese developers, and that's also spilling into Western games now. We've known how terrible Sony's been for a while. They've targeted Japanese developers for years and are very strict with what can and can't be in games, and now we have this. There are so many people out there who say censorship isn't a big deal, but it is. Open your eyes. One of the largest companies in the gaming industry is doing BS like this. They're not allowing companies to create the games they want, and as long as a game's properly rated, there shouldn't be an issue, yet there is. I mean, let's look at Devil May Cry 5. Sony added lens flares over Trish's butt. How freaking pathetic. A game rated M for mature. They tried to censor a giant Capcom game, yet there was so much backlash, they actually removed the censorship. But they tried to get away with it. They thought no one was going to notice and no one would have an issue with it. This situation that I'm talking about today, about the dismemberment, might not directly affect the West right now and games coming to the West, but it's definitely something that could spill over into the West. But continuing on with the article, as an example, Matsumaya turned to the company's work on the Naruto Ultimate Ninja series and noted that despite the character of Minato having his arm severed in the original Naruto story, the fourth Hokage instead appeared within the games with his arm intact in order to comply with the Sony policy that forbids limb defects in human-looking characters. In terms of the fourth Hokage battle, where the arm of Hokage is not in the original work, but but it is in the original game. In this sort of sense, it's not always Zero, but also PlayStation and Sony Interactive Entertainment who decide on things like this as well, he said through a translator. He added, depending on the situation, the game may not be able to be released, which is why things are done in ways that may not always follow the original work. And then it goes on to give another example, where notably the same policy resulted in Naruto and Sasuke's severed arms, one apiece lost, by the two rivals during their final confrontation, being depicted as blackened rather than outright severed in Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm 4. We are going to get to a point where no content is acceptable anymore. Sexy female characters aren't acceptable. Maybe even sexy male characters aren't acceptable. We're going to get to a point where you can't have violence in games. This is going to be a big problem in the future, I feel like. This is something that needs to be called out now before it gets worse and worse and worse. And then if it gets worse, we're just going to have copy and paste games. We're not going to have any original projects anymore. No original ideas. And this is really why Sony is doing all of this. Let's go to an article about the sexy female characters. Sony is reportedly changing its standards for sexual content in new PlayStation games in response to the hashtag #MeToo movement and live streaming, and this was actually back in 2019. It says Sony has adopted new standards to cut down on the number of PlayStation games that feature sexually explicit depictions of women. The PlayStation 4 is the most popular video game console on the planet. Sony told the Journal changed its policies for approving new PlayStation games in response to the hashtag #MeToo movement and growing interest in live streams on platforms like Twitch and YouTube. This is their excuse to censor sexy females in video games. This is their reasoning because this is a direct response to the hashtag #MeToo movement. Let's go to another example of censorship. Sony seemingly censors controversial Senran Kagura mode. So Senran Kagura Burst Renewal will not include its controversial intimacy mode on the PS4, which effectively allows you to fondle the private parts of its questionably aged cast of anime characters. This writer is saying it's controversial, questionably aged cast. That's the same type of response Sony would give. They're questionably aged and it was very controversial to begin with, so why not just censor it? It says previous installments on Sony's system have included this feature, as does the Japanese version of the same game, so it seems that the platform holders changed its policy towards extremely sexual content in the West. Here is yet the other example that I wanted to bring up. Sony's censorship policy hits Devil May Cry 5 on the PlayStation 4. I did mention this. Sony's recently implemented policy of censoring third-party games on the PlayStation platform has finally come to a AAA release. Capcom's long-awaited DMC5 was released last week on all platforms, but the game's Day 1 patch on PS4 censors a cinematic scene in the game using, you guessed it, lens flares. A few hours into the game, Dante rescues a fully nude Trish from a demon, very briefly revealing the upper portion of her butt, obviously, during the cutscene that follows. Once the one-day patch is applied to the game, a bizarre pink-colored lens flare covers her sinful bits. This censorship applies only to the Western PS4 version of the game, while the Japanese version has not been censored in the same way. And they did also try to censor the Japanese version, and then they ended up removing it because there was so much backlash. They've already tried to start censoring AAA games, but when we fight back against it, they change their mind. They see the power that we have. Games like The Last of Us Part 2 and the golf club scenes are perfectly fine because it's their own games. I've seen people saying, why wasn't The Last of Us Part 2 censored? Why aren't all their first-party games censored? It's because they never hold back their own developers. They know they would make less money if they did that. And when it comes to Zero versus the ESRB, Zero is very heavy-handed with ratings. They rate games very high for very small reasons, but at the same time, they still let you create the games that you want. It's just that Sony wants their games on their systems to not be rated adult only. They want as many low-rated games as possible so they can be marketed and sold to more people. It's just the way that these companies work. And when development companies are afraid of not getting their games on systems, they'll self-censor things and change them so companies like Sony won't reject them. It is a vicious cycle that never stops, that needs to be talked about by more people, that people need to bring attention to. You know, I'm not saying that games don't get banned in Japan, because they definitely do, but it's a very rare thing, and the wiki even says that. Games with violence have been heavily modified in Japan over the years. Look at the Mortal Kombat series. It's been straight out banned due to violence, and there's a lot of other games that were heavily modified before they hit the market, like Grand Theft Auto 5, but they're still very rare occurrences compared to other countries like China and Australia, and obviously the United States never bans games because of the First Amendment, but all of these bannings affect the content that we all experience. This is very disappointing news to see, and I really hope that Sony changes their ways, but honestly, I unfortunately doubt it. They've been down this path for a couple of years. They've been trying to censor a lot of video games, whether it's sexual content or now violence, and I really don't think that's going to change. But let everyone know your thoughts in the comments section down below. If you enjoyed this video and found it important and informative, please make sure to give it a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel. And of course, if you didn't, make sure to give it a dislike. I appreciate your support either way, but I will talk to you all again in the next video really soon.